Hello and welcome to the two-man Power Trip Wrestling. Your host, JP John Paz. With me today, a very special guest, a wrestler, a trainer, an author, a former NWA World Champion, Mr. Mike Quackenbush. Mike, welcome in. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. What's going on in your world? What are you up to? Seems like very busy lately.
Yeah, I'm really thankful to be as busy as I am. Every once and again, my tendency is to grouse about like, oh, I'm so busy, and I got. No, it's great to be busy. I'm really glad to be busy right now. I'm in the middle of a swing of North American tour dates where I'm wrestling a couple matches here and there, but mostly I'm teaching everywhere that I go. I'm kind of going from wrestling school to wrestling school across the U.S. and Canada. And then I've got some international stuff coming up a little bit later on that I haven't announced yet. But even just before you and I jumped on, I was kind of updating my calendar a little bit, and I had to resist that urge to be like, oh man, like I have booked myself up like crazy. Um, Having gone through very fallow periods, let me tell you, I'm glad to be busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I just did a trios match on Friday. That was in Alabama. Just had a singles match in Pennsylvania. I got a couple coming up still later this year. So, for someone, I'm 48 years old now. I'm 30 years into the business. And I've had a whole lot of injuries and every type of setback somebody can face in the course of their career. I feel very, very fortunate that people are still calling and saying, hey, do you want to put on the sparkly jammies and come have a wrestle with us? So, provided that everything is right, because I also realize I'm probably one serious injury away from just being done for good. So I can't be perhaps as carefree about things as I was when I was like an 18-year-old rookie.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. But that's cool, though. I mean, still wrestling, like you said,
Mhm.
pretty much 30 years. Because, man, I remember when you were on the New Jersey indie scene up here by me. God,
Yeah.
in the '90s. So yeah, it has been a while.
Right. I do feel, I'm of two minds. On the one, it's very difficult to relate to what it was like starting out like that. The first couple years in, when I finally met Ace Darling and Devin Storm, two stalwarts of the New Jersey scene, and got to learn some of the craft by sitting underneath their learning tree, and discovering the hard way what it is to make every single mistake out there, versus where I'm at now, where I have this laundry list of people that I mentor, that I'm senior to, and that I have to impart some of those exact same lessons that were being taught to me, 25 plus years ago by the Ace Darlings and the Devon Storms of the world. So I've really kind of seen it from its spring deep into its autumn.
I love that. Both buddies of mine, especially Ace, he's really good. I would talk to him all the time. So I'm gonna
Mm.
have to tell him one of his proteges that I talked to him
Mhm.
like recently. Very cool. I love that New Jersey scene just because all those guys. Devin Storm, obviously everybody knows him as Crowbar. But Ace Darling, maybe forgotten but great.
Mm.
Lance Diamond, people probably know him as Simon
Right?
Diamond, right? I mean, Inferno Kid. There's a bunch of good
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
that came out of there.
Absolutely, right? Inferno Kid, he was the first regular tag team partner I had as an independent. We were Fire and Lightning back in the day. All these guys, tremendously talented, tremendously knowledgeable, and it's a shame, especially in the case of Ace, he does not get his due. It's one of the many reasons why I dedicated one of my most recent books to him, just to keep his name out there a little bit. I don't want his name to tumble into obscurity.
Wow, nice. I like that. Which book is this?
I'm 99% sure it is Toolbox Building Better Pro Wrestling. And I believe that inscription reads something to the effect of I dedicated it to Ace, as he is the one who gave me the tools when I needed it most. And of the 10 books that I've written, most of which are up on Amazon, or if you like audiobooks, they're on audible.com. That is one of the ones that sells the best. It's certainly the one I get asked about the most at my seminars. So I love that I have a little bit of him baked in there. And I did send him a copy a couple years ago, and I got the feeling he never opened it. Like I don't think he realizes why I sent it to him.
I'm gonna have to tell him, hey, open the book and look at the inscription in there. You
Right,
may be mentioned. Yeah, come on,
right.
Ace, come on. I do have the Seven Keys. I have that. That's a great book. I love that.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Thank you for checking that out. I'm very proud of that one.
It's interesting. I remember, God, it had to be, I'm trying to think, it was 2015, 2016. You did a seminar at the Wrestle Factor. I was there. It was great. And I could see
Oh,
why Alexa Bliss and all these other people were like singing your praises as far as
mm,
training and how much they like it, because it was very relaxed. But I felt like I learned, and being a fan forever, you think you know stuff, but obviously you really don't know anything until you go in there. But I feel like I learned so much stuff from you that it was almost like off the cuff. You're like this, you're like, go right, go this, go, and you were just
mm.
very simple stuff. Even the lockup, no, you get a little bit tighter here, around the neck. So just the little things. So I was like really impressed with your coaching. So your seminars are probably great as well.
Well, thank you for that. And it's weird to think when I was coming up, I often felt like I'm having obsessive compulsive disorder. I felt like it was a curse that I carried around with me. In hindsight, I do feel like some of my attention to detail is wrapped up in that. And my attention to detail, I think, is one thing that often distinguishes my classes. I'm not afraid to really get into the weeds with the details. As I say in virtually every class I teach, the devil is in the details. So on the one hand, there are days where I wish I was less finely attuned to those little annoying details. But in some ways, I think it has helped me improve as a teacher and as a coach.
Yeah, but I agree. I mean, it's definitely it's there. I mean, I've seen it in person, at the Wrestle Factory. Obviously this is years ago. Chikara was still going and everything, but yeah, that was maybe the good old days, so to
Mhm.
speak. Maybe
Right.
not the Jersey days or the good old days. Maybe 10 years ago was the good old days. Who knows?
Well, I was just speaking with a friend of mine about this exact thing that I have been very fortunate to have a couple very distinct eras of my career. So, we're talking about the New Jersey era. I kind of think of that as my magazine days. I was working for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The
Right.
Wrestler, the Apter family of magazines at London Kappa Publishing. So, there was for a while a fan base that only knew me through the magazines. There is a fan base that only knows me through my independent work. There's a fan base that only knows Chikara. And now, in the phase that I'm in currently, with Till We Make It, my YouTube project, and all the educational multimedia I produce for professional wrestlers, there are people just this weekend. I had people in the ring who said, "Yeah, I only know you from YouTube." They've never heard of a Chikara, and they're too young to even know what a magazine is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or like the New Jersey Independency, New Jack City Wrestling. What the hell is New Jack City Wrestling? Come play in our hood. Remember those Austin commercials? Like,
Mhm.
oh my god. But yeah, they're definitely not going to remember that. And I don't even
No,
think you can find that on YouTube either. I don't think.
no, I don't think so.
That's just fresh in my memory from 1995, I guess, for those commercials. They used to play,
95, yeah.
those commercials used to play like crazy on
Mhm.
my cable system. Just nuts.
Yeah, that's wild.
You weren't in that commercial, were you? Where they're all
I
banging on the hood, come play in our hood?
No, no.
Okay.
There were a couple times like that where I felt like I was really miscast at a wrestling organization. Boy, I think they only ran one or two shows, but I remember there was a company, they might have run New York City, where the whole theme of the event was it was very much ensconced in hip hop culture, and I'm the most painfully white person you will ever meet, and I was like, I am horribly miscast in this group, but yeah, in many ways, some of those weird opportunities I got are some of my favorite to recount to people. Being, kind of like the fish out of water. Every once and again, the
Yep.
result of that is you walk away with a great story.
Yes, true. Now you definitely can't find New Jack City Wrestling on YouTube for whatever reason. You can't. I mean, those tapes or whatever, they're all gone. But what about Till We Make It? Tell us about that, because it's very, very good, very interesting, and always like an insightful bit of knowledge. Whether you realize it or not, you're going to take something away from it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Thank you for that. Yeah, so Till We Make It is my YouTube channel. And I started about 5 years ago now. There's over 500 tutorial videos there for you to watch. Um, and it's basically made for the budding professional wrestler. That isn't to say that I don't make some for seasoned veterans as well. But I would say the majority of the material there is to help people who are making that transition from being on one side of the curtain to the other. I would wager to say 99% of us, I was about to say all of us. That's probably never true, but let's say 99% of us who become wrestlers, we started out as wrestling fans. We loved it so much, we wanted to make wrestling ourselves. But making that transition from one side of the curtain to the other, well, oftentimes that can be fraught. And as I alluded to before I met Ace Darling, Devin Storm, and the like, I was just kind of like making it up as I went. And I really wasted the first 3 years of my career, some of my formative years, because I had no coach, I had no mentor, I had nobody to help me. And I do feel like, reflecting back on the arc of these last 30 years, there were a lot of mistakes that I made, pitfalls I fell into that I could have avoided if I'd had somebody to help me when I needed it most. That's kind of where Till We Make It came from. I want you to have the information and the tools that you need when you need them. So it's like this giant online repository of wrestling knowledge that's really just a YouTube search away. And I wouldn't be surprised if, when I finally get to the tail end of this entire thing and I look back on the various eras of my own career, this proves to be one of the most influential, because I don't think a day goes by now where someone doesn't reach out from me or to me from a corner of the globe. And I think, how do you even know who I am? And the answer is always, Till We Make It. The most recent of these, while I was in Alabama, I had a wrestler from Patagonia reach out to me.
Whoa.
Right? Like, that's almost as close to Antarctica as you can get without just getting on a boat and sailing into the ice. And they were like, I just watched your Friday video and have a question. These things, they boggle my mind, but I'm delighted that it has found its own community and that people have really begun to appreciate and treasure everything that is there, because it's been a real labor of love making these for 5 years straight.
That's amazing. I mean, random guy from East Bumble. Geez, I mean that's pretty amazing. But they could obviously they could find you because it's the internet and YouTube
Right.
and anybody can find you. But that's great though. He took a piece of knowledge from you. I'm sure there's many others that probably you're probably from the United States or maybe
Sure.
Canada or UK or something, right? I mean, you probably have a lot of guys reaching out to you.
Definitely. And yet it never ceases to amaze me. In the YouTube analytics tab, you can get really granular with the information that's there.
Yep.
I'm always amused, like 2.6% of my audience is in India. Who knew? Who knew they would care what an independent wrestler who's never had a television run ever thinks about wrestling in India? But they do. So as much as each phase of my career has helped me to reach a different audience, this has certainly proven to be the most cosmopolitan audience I've cultivated yet. And for that, I'm very, very glad.
Does that ever bother you or like any sort of regret towards like not having a TV run? Does that bother you at all?
It's funny you mention that, John, because I was just having this conversation very, very recently about how different would my career be right now, 30 years in, even if I'd had a very brief television run. And I can't imagine it. I can't picture it. I'm sure I could probably command more dollars for my services if I had a TV run under my belt.
Yep.
But I don't. And when I look back on opportunities I passed on, for example, like with WCW or ECW, I've second guessed a lot of those moves throughout the years. And yet, this is true whether you're in wrestling or not. I've ended up where I've ended up exactly because of the choices I made when I made them. And I'm really enjoying this current phase of my wrestling career. If there's like a better version of this, right, a greater version of this, a version where there's more money or more notoriety or whatever comes with those things, well, I don't know any of that. So I can't really feel like I'm missing out on it. And, that's not to say that every once and again I don't look at some of my most famous protégés, some of my most famous trainees, right? Right now they're on the biggest stages of them all. Going into this weekend in Wembley Stadium, wow, is that top of mind for me. How many of my kids are on that Wembley show? And while every once and again, to be frank about it, do I have a pang of jealousy over that? Yeah, man, sometimes I watch, I'm like, man, I wish that was me. But because I don't really know, it's not like I miss it or that I'm like, oh, man, back when I was doing that kind of thing. Like, no, I don't have one of those back when I was doing that kind of stories.
When you look at WCW and ECW, what was the opportunities there? Like, what was the possibilities? They wanted you to come and do some matches, or did they actually want to bring you in?
Yes. So in both cases, it was very neatly tied to the work that I was doing with Reckless Youth, Tom Carter. And Tom started the Wrestle Factory and Chikara with me in 2002 before he moved on to other business interests. Nevertheless, There was a period of time in the late 90s where Tom and I were a peanut butter and jelly match. We would get booked on together everywhere because it tasted great. So people would put us together like peanut butter and jelly. And this really down to the fact that Tom was as remarkable and outstanding as he was, not down to anything I was doing, let me assure you. This put me on the radar a couple places. So I'll give you the full skinny on just one of them. Tom went and did a weekend on the road with ECW. And I'm going to guess this was end in 1998. Maybe it was 1999. If you know better than me, well, you can write down below and tell us what it is. Nevertheless, after that particular weekend, they had said, hey, would you guys want to come in as a tag team? We want you to buy matching gear. And we'd like for you to put on maybe 10 pounds of muscle before you start. So you better get busy in the gym, boys. And this is a very exciting opportunity. As someone who really, one, has studied and idolized the matches that Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko had in ECW, and just was flabbergasted by the work of Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis, let alone the hair-raising matches of Tajiri and Super Crazy in ECW, the idea that there was an opportunity there, my gosh. But Tom and I had a very real talk about it. And he described to me his weekend on the road with them, what the culture and the habits of that locker room were behind the scenes. And he said, Mike, their lifestyle is completely oppositional to the way you and I are. And, you know, the stories about how the ECW locker room was are legendary for good reason. And he said, I think we will be miserable. If we take this gig, we will hate it because the way they live is not at all how you and I live. And to be in the middle of all of that, surrounded by that going around, I think we're going to hate it. I think we should pass. So we did. And then that opportunity went to Christian York and Joey Matthews, who went on to be Joey Mercury. And they found success there. And I stand by Tom's assessment. If he said this is not a good fit for us, their locker room culture is not a fit, I believe and I trust him. And yet that doesn't mean that I don't often go back and think about that or other opportunities that came my way and kind of second guess them. Like, well, what if this? Or, you know, what if that? Maybe we could have made it work, but there's no going back. And to spend much time ruminating on that or just kind of, you know, spiraling down that rabbit hole, I'll make myself nuts.
True. Very true. That's very interesting. You obviously York and Matthews right around 99, the time period they head in, and you guys don't get this. Wow, that's really interesting.
Right.
Probably right though, if you look at it. Probably not the best locker room for you at the time, probably.
Right. It probably was not. And, you know, Christian and Joey, they tore it up. Two phenomenally talented guys and brilliant guys. I once had the opportunity to sit in and listen to Joey Mercury as he was producing some matches for some TV somewhere. And I thought, this guy understands, like he's playing 4-dimensional chess here. I wish I could just sit and listen to him talk about wrestling for an hour or two. So, you know, those were two very deserving guys. I think if the two guys that got slotted in instead were not guys I thought so highly of, I'd feel a certain kind of way about that.
Yes, yes. What about WCW? What was the spot with WCW?
So there was an opportunity there to be part of the cruiserweight division, but there had been a kind of like a change of the guard there. And at the time, if memory serves, Vince Russo was taking over doing a lot of the booking. Creatively, that's not a guy I think very highly of, just to be plain about it. And the request was that I would relocate to Atlanta. In order to take advantage of this, and I think there were 8 of us who got this offer, we had to relocate to Atlanta by a certain start date. And I believe this was the same group. If I'm remembering right, I was in the same bunch with AJ Styles, Air Paris, maybe Christopher Daniels was in this group, and the majority of them did take the deal. Some of them, I think, only made WCW TV once or twice and then got cut because as Russo continued to restructure the cruiserweight division, there was kind of like steering away from what I liked best about the WCW cruisers into a very differently flavored end product, which was not particularly to my taste. However, I had just closed on my first house and was moving in. And I just set everything up. I just bought my own first house. And these guys wanted me to move within 30 days, pick up and just do it all over again to Atlanta. I'm like, I just went through a move and it was miserable. I don't want to do this again. And perhaps in my hubris, I thought, another opportunity will come in time and one will feel right to me. and this one did not feel right to me. And so I did not take advantage of it. When I saw later that a handful of the guys who did were released shortly after they moved to Atlanta, to me, it kind of validated that it was not the right deal for me. And having said as much, John, I do often second guess that decision. I think, well, why didn't I just box everything back up and go? What if I'd only done one Monday Nitro? What would the shape of my career have been after that? I don't know, but I'll never know. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but imagine if you just close on the house, you go to move down there, you get released, and you got to go back. What are you going to? You probably got rid of the house already because you've moved to Atlanta.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've been living in the back of my Hyundai Excel for a while.
Yeah, yeah. You'd be like those wrestlers back in the day, living in the van, brother. You know what I mean?
Right.
Doing that thing. Oh man, that would have been nutty. Well, that's interesting though. Any WWF interest though? Like obviously Ace and Devin Storm for a while were doing enhancement matches, and the Iron Mike Sharp
Right.
role, if you will. Any of those or any of those chances or no?
Not back then, but I've done I should say, I did sporadic work for the WWE between 2016 and 2019. Whether I was there in a guest coach role, doing consulting on the creative side, or pitching in any way that they asked, producing NXT, etc. So I was very, very fortunate, and I believe to this day I hold the record for being the guest coach that did the most return visits in the history of the Performance Center. They brought me back so often. A few times, there were offers. The deals were not right for me. But all three of those occasions, they were not for me to appear on screen as talent. They were interested to have me working backstage in that coaching and creative and et cetera, that department. Of course, it was very flattering to be asked, though. And the last of those offers, I took it very, very seriously. We did negotiate off and on for about 2 months trying to make the deal right. But it just wasn't right. And ultimately, they ended up giving that spot to the Road Dogg, who I'm sure did a phenomenal job in that position. I think he held it for about a year. When I got the call that they decided instead that he was willing to relocate to Orlando to work full-time at the Performance Center, and I was not willing to make that commitment. And they called me up to explain as much. I thought, why didn't we do this from the beginning, guys? He's in your Hall of Fame. He's been on WrestleManias. He was in a stable with the guys running NXT, Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Like, why was I even part of this conversation? Just go with the Road Dogg. He's great. And I'm sure he did a great job for him. So I don't really bear any resentment toward that whatsoever. But yeah, the interest was never to have me as an on-screen talent.
So would you have to move down there though? That's the thing too. You'd have to be living in Florida, right? Essentially.
That's right. They really wanted me to become a full-time part of the Performance Center, and that just wasn't the right fit for me. It would have required me to basically divest myself of Chikara and the Wrestle Factory, and to only focus on what would be my WWE workload. Effectively, I would have been exclusive with them. And while they were willing to negotiate on some of those details with me, it just never got to a point where I felt like, yep, this is it. This is the next thing for me. And the weather's nice in Orlando. I'm not trying to fool you. And I got to work with some incredibly talented people down there. You never knew what it was going to be. One day you'd show up for class and I'm in there chain wrestling around with Chad Gable. The next day they're asking if I can get in the ring with Bianca Belair and teach her some lucha. There are worse jobs you can have than that, John. But the deal just wasn't right for me.
Oh, very interesting. How did you get in to begin with? Like, who contacts you to start working there? Is that like a Matt Bloom thing, or?
Well, you're not far off. So you may know that a Wrestle Factory graduate, Sarah Del Rey, eventually left wrestling to become the second in charge down at the Performance Center under her given name of Sarah Amato. And when they were looking for new guest coaches who would bring in a fresh perspective, I'm sure with a degree of caution, right? Sarah was kind of like, look, if you're looking for an outside the box guy, there's Mike, but it's pretty far outside the box. Like the flavor of wrestling he makes is not WWE flavor at all. But if you want to give him a try, call him up. And so they did. Matt Bloom did reach out and said, would you want to come down for a week? And, just to be very plain about the whole thing, I went down there expecting to hate it. I figured The moment I said something they disagreed with, like, for example, if I said, hey, everybody, today we're going to do some pro wrestling, I expected there'd be some WWE suit who would step out from behind a curtain with a clipboard and say, we say sports entertainment here.
Right. Yep.
That's what I thought I was in for. Nothing could have been further from the truth. They really were like, just do what you do. We want you to do what you do as hard as you do it. Go. They never said, you can't teach that here. We don't do it like that. Could you adjust it to sound more like this corporate speak? There was absolutely none of that. They were so welcoming and so respectful. I almost thought it was a rib. I couldn't believe it. So when they asked me to start coming back on a recurring basis, which came to a conclusion about the summer of 2019, there were periods where I was down there every third or fourth week contributing. I really was shocked by it. I rather think of myself as being, I don't want to say anti-WWE. I don't think that's quite fair to say, but nearly the opposite in the way that I approach wrestling. And they could not have been more open to hearing my ideas and to giving me the freedom to show them what I do and listening to why I do it the way that I do. They really were keenly interested to broaden their point of view on things. Even people who, just to give you one weird slice of this, why I was ever in a creative meeting telling Triple H and Shawn Michaels what I think we should be doing on NXT TV when I've never wrestled a match for the Fed ever is beyond me. And yet they sat there and were like, thank you for that, Mike. We appreciate the feedback. It could not have been more different than what I thought it was going to be.
That's so interesting that they're much more open, I guess, to different ideas and different philosophies. Very, very cool.
Right.
To know that.
I thought they'd be very closed-minded, to be honest about it. And I was pleasantly surprised it was the opposite. The fact that that Triple H had read 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, I was like, I never thought you'd be quoting my book back to me. This is wild.
Wow. So he did do that. Wow. So not only am I reading it, Triple H is reading it as well. That's very cool. How did he get the copy? Did you give him the copy?
No, but I was curious about that exact thing. So maybe I don't know, the year before that book came out, I delivered a speech at a conference called Ignite Philly 16. You can watch this speech. It's on YouTube. If you put in The Art of Wrestling Mike Quackenbush, as opposed to The Art of Wrestling Colt Cabana, The Art of Wrestling Mike Quackenbush in YouTube, it'll come right up. Well, he had watched that speech. And apparently he thought enough of it that somebody loaned him the book, or he got it himself, I guess. But yeah, I was really quite shocked that he knew my material. And I do think maybe if they had not liked that, the Ignite Philly speech that I gave about pro wrestling and the content of my book, maybe they would not have been so open to hearing my feedback and insight. So I'm glad that it kind of served as a calling card for me.
Do you know, like, what specifically he was, like, quoting from the book, or, like, what he specifically liked from the book that he was kind of reiterating to you?
Part of the book is about the way we sell as baby faces and about the necessity of showing vulnerability. And I think that really spoke to him. There was also a speech I actually gave to the entire NXT crew that was kind of focused on where the emotional core of a wrestling match is. When I think of this internally, I call it the heat is the heart. That's what I think of, right? And I remember someone saying, like, I just recorded that. Is it all right if I share that with the guys, in the corporate suite? And I was like, be my guest. So I was aware that they had heard at least a little bit of my take on things, and it must have intrigued them enough at least to keep me around for a while.
I love that. Now, very interesting, because I was just thinking when I was talking to this guy, he's from Canada. He used to be called the best there is, was, and ever will be, or maybe he still is. I was talking to him, and we were talking about something. that hopefully we'll be working on very, very soon. But it basically was saying, how come he picked certain moves and he didn't really change those moves, but the rest of the match, he doesn't like to do the same match over and over. It's always different. Certain guys have a certain set match that they do, no matter who they're wrestling, but they kind of go through the same match. He likes to do a completely different match, but when it gets to that certain point, he likes to do his certain moves. And he was explaining to me that those are like you said, like the highlights or like the best part. And I was thinking of you when he was saying this, that he would always hit those moves because he could excellently execute them the best, and like the crowd would pop at those moves, but they were like his highlights, if you will. And I was like, wow, I remember Mike said that same thing in one of his books, that it was basically like, it's your highlights that the people kind of want to see, but those are your specific ones that you're going to try to get over and resonate with. So I just thought that was so interesting from him, that he wanted so much of the match to be different and change it, but not that part. Like when he's hitting his signature moves, if you will, he's keeping them the same, and he's making sure like he's getting that reaction every time, and he's going to keep it.
That puts a smile on my cranky face.
Yes.
There's probably there are no two wrestlers that I probably watched more of than Owen and Bret Hart. And I think Bret Hart is the single best finish guy in all of wrestling. The fact that we refer to finishes of his matches by the shorthand, like, hey, remember Bret and Davey at SummerSlam 92? Everyone knows what that finish is.
Yes.
Remember Bret and Owen from 10? Everyone knows exactly what that finish is. I think he's the best finish guy of all time, and I'm a deep admirer of his work. So that puts a big smile on my cranky face. But you're exactly right. It's the same thing. It's the same type of ritual we go through when we go to see our favorite band in concert. If they did not play their greatest hits, we would feel a little unfulfilled by the experience. To call out a very broad one that will probably resonate with lots of people, if you paid money to go and see Journey in concert, and Journey didn't play Don't Stop Believin', there's a giant chunk of the audience that would be like, what? That's what we paid for. And in the same way, if I got to see a Bret Hart match live, you better believe I want to see the pendulum backbreaker, the side Russian leg sweep, the elbow where he holds his own elbow and jumps off the second rope. I want to see the Bret Hart greatest hits. As a fan and admirer of his work, it is very much the same ritual I experience when I go to see my favorite band in concert. I want to hear the greatest hits. And of course, I want you to surprise me. I want you to change it up. I don't want you to only play your greatest hits. I want some surprises in the mix. But you can't leave your hits out. Even if after a while you get resentful of playing your greatest hits, man, you got to remember what brought you to the dance.
Yes, I love it. He calls it the signature moves. You called it the greatest hits, but yes, it's so true. Like you got to see him hit that. Like you got to see him, and then the sharpshooter. Like it's got to be the greatest hits, which is so true because I just saw Creed a few weeks ago, and they played higher. If they didn't play higher, I feel like everybody would have been nuts. Like, what do you guys want? Or chanting it or like something. You got to play your greatest hits. But I was immediately, when he was saying that to me, because I was wondering how come he was so dead set on having different matches but the same moveset towards his signature moves, the greatest hits, if you will. It literally resonated. I was like, wow, that makes legit perfect sense because that's what people want to see. They want to see the Russian leg sweep. You know what I mean? They want to see that.
Right. I don't know, John. Maybe we got to connect those dots. If there's one brain in wrestling I would love to pick, it's a guy who wears pink and black to the ring.
Yes. So funny. Ace was saying the same thing to me. He wanted to connect with him. Yeah, he's just one of those guys you could just talk about wrestling, even from a fan perspective. I can say this, like, hey, you wrestled Dino Bravo and you did this. And he's like, oh man, he's like not ripping Dino, but like he was a little harder to work with, how to do this, it's just so fun, like kind of picking his brain about all this things. He'd be like, PCO, Carl Willett, like, how come this, like, and he would have an answer and explain it and do this and that. He was one of the first guys too to really say, like, okay, Diesel, how do I make him look really good, but also make it work in the match psychology wise? Just a genius.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad that he's sort of seen, a victory lap that he's enjoyed, thanks in large part to the FTR guys really celebrate him, For a while, it felt like, I don't mean this as like an allusion to that documentary, but that he was relegated to the shadows, which is a real shame. To people of my generation in wrestling, he is one of, if not the single most significant character, and he's a great inspiration to generations of wrestlers. And for him to have had to kind of spend his time in the shadows, I think was a disservice to us all.
And Punk too. Good thing Punk always talks him up and wears his shirts and stuff because I feel like it's been a resurgence. And I almost want to say to these fans, like, "Hello, where have you been? He's always been the best." Like, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, he's probably the best wrestler ever. So it's weird that it's taking people that long to get it, but at least they're getting it now for sure.
Right. I'm glad, so many times people don't get their due until it's too late. And, while there's nothing wrong with lionizing somebody posthumously, and having said as much, especially in the social media era, a lot of that feels very bogus. It feels performative. I'm glad that he is alive and is able to see his work being celebrated. He deserves nothing less.
As far as WWE and the Performance Center
Mhm.
stuff in there, who did you connect with the most? Because it felt like Alexa Bliss talked you up. I mean, it felt like there was a bunch of different performers that really enjoyed working with you, and then they really talked you up down there.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to be mixed in with almost everybody. I mean, there's so many people down there at any one given time. On average, there's 80 people training at the Performance Center at any
Wow.
one given time. So, it's not exactly possible to get to everybody.
Yeah.
Um, But on my off days, I would often just show up and do one-on-one training with anybody that wanted to hop in the ring with me. And uh, oftentimes there, I got to connect on a more personal level than when I was hosting a class that had 8 or 10 people in it. If you said, "Hey, could you and I just wrestle together for an hour?" Obviously, that one-on-one connection was much stronger. Like I alluded to, there was a day where I just wrestled for a straight hour with Chad Gable. What a delight it was to be on the mat with that guy who can just pick everything up. You only have to show him anything once ever, and he's already mastered it. By the second time, he's better at it than I was, and I just taught it to him. So it's always very rewarding to be in there with such high level athletes. Um, the same was true. I got to spend a lot of time with Zia Lee, who I know they released a couple months ago, which I think is a real shame. Somebody who just had such incredible potential, and I'm sure she's going to realize that potential just outside of the WWE system. But I got to see a lot of her growth over the course of months and months and months, because as she was acclimating to the system there, that's when I was often down there every third or fourth week. So I'd go away for a couple weeks, come back and get to see how much she had improved. Whereas maybe if I saw her every single day, sometimes you miss it. It's like weight loss. If you're losing some pounds, but you look at yourself in the mirror every day, you may not see it. But if you saw a before and an after photo of yourself, then you would realize it. And, the same was true. I felt very flattered to often be requested by Alexa Bliss, who I think if one thing impressed me about her, which isn't to say there wasn't a multitude of things. For example, she has a near photographic memory. This is like a superpower. She could read a typed page of a promo and have it down once after reading it once. So
Wow.
Alexa's got a lot of superpowers, but one of them was she's fearless in the ring. It doesn't matter how complicated, how risky, how complex something is. She's willing to take it on head on. It doesn't take her long to master much of anything because she's so athletically gifted. And the fact that her schedule was as punishing as it was, and I'll give you a real example of that. She would be on the road sometimes for 5 weeks, change her flight around basically so she could make it to training at the performance center rather than go home and unpack her luggage. She would just come right from her flight to training after 5 straight days on the road, knowing she's leaving again that night. She's barely left herself enough time to do laundry and go back on the road, but she made sure she got it to training, told me everything about how seriously she took the craft. And when I see somebody that's that passionate about wrestling, that brings it out of me. When I'm with people who, they're more lackadaisical about it, or they are perhaps, I know this sounds very judgmental, so forgive me, but I feel like they're chasing it for the wrong reasons. Sometimes that turns me off, you know. I'm not so willing to show up 2 hours early just to get in the ring and roll around with you for those reasons. But I found her to be very inspirational to work with. And all those experiences I had down there, yeah, I wouldn't trade them for anything.
Now, as far as maybe the other side of the spectrum, maybe truly opposite of WB, AEW, ever any interest, any talk, anything going on with AEW land?
Sure. So, it does feel like about half their roster were trained by me.
Yeah.
And so many of that gang I'm still in touch with every single week. So I have a unique insight into how things are going on backstage there. Even some of their most recent hires to help out backstage were people that came, whether they were from Chikara or out of my system, etc. So I'm keenly aware of what's going on over there and the challenge that they're facing, which are numerous right now. It's a company that's trying to grow. Its identity has changed since its initial formation. Going back, whatever that was, 5-6 years ago now. They're really at an inflection point. And I was lucky enough in the very early days to have gone backstage and met everybody back there, including one of my heroes, Dean Malenko. It's probably the last time I was ever starstruck. Was like, oh my gosh, there he is. But yeah, at least for the moment, no. And who knows, right? Who knows what the future holds? But at least for the time being, I can't say so.
When you look at that, right, and you see so many people that came through your system, uh, Eddie Kingston's over there. I mean, so many guys, you could just rattle them off. Does that make you like proud, or does that make you think like, hey, I should be there? You know what I mean? It's almost like a little bittersweet, I would think.
Right. Like I said, every once and again, I feel a slight pang of jealousy.
Yeah.
Right. I see him doing something really awesome or fun, and I'm like, oh man, I would love to be doing that. But I would say more than anything, I'm just overwhelmed with pride when I see how many of my, I call them my kids, how many of my kids are doing it on the big stage, or even like, when I'm out every other weekend now doing seminars all over the place, and somebody comes up to me and says, yeah, my hero in wrestling is Claudio Castagnoli. Like, that is meaningful to me. I'm the guy that convinced him to move to the US and train here. So yeah, I regard all of that with a real deep sense of pride.
You've got some hell of a students or hell of a resume there, hell of a list you got going on.
Right.
If you think about it.
Yeah, it's not too shabby.
Yeah, let's see. Claudio, Eddie. Yeah, you got a bunch of good ones too. Yeah, that's amazing.
Right. Orange Cassidy's with them. Of course, Bryce Remsburg, the referee. One of my recent graduates, Lady Frost, has been with them now for several months. Although I trained him outside of the Wrestle Factory, Malachi Black is one of my kids. So, there's a fair share. And then you kind of expand that to the people who I really helped them kind of hone their characters through the work we did at Chikara. That list doubles in size. Or then, you take on the people who trained with me only part-time or, what have you. The list just kind of grows and grows. So, like I said, kind of bring it back where we started, whether it was the work I was doing in the magazines 20 plus years ago or what I'm doing this Friday on my YouTube channel. It never ceases to amaze me, the weird ways in which my contributions to wrestling have reached people.
Gotta love it. Now, like going back to AEW just for a second here, you mentioned Wembley too, which is obviously a huge show. Second time they're going to be doing this. Guy that you know very well. Actually, I think I still have it somewhere, but I know I used to watch it all the time. A little thing called the DVD of a disc compilation of you and Bryan Danielson and your wrestling matches and your feud. What do you think about that possible retirement for an old I guess enemy of yours, quote unquote, so to speak?
Right. I mean, for what he has gone through, he has certainly earned himself an epic send-off, and I hope that this time around he gets to choose it on his own terms. He was faced with some very serious medical complications not all that many years ago, and he was kind of forced to the sidelines. None of that was his call. None of that was on his own terms. And for someone who's dedicated so much of his life and time and energy and everything else to this weird thing we all love, I hope that he gets to go out on his own terms.
What do you think about him maybe being one of your greatest rivals or one of your greatest opponents? Would you put him up there? I mean, I certainly would.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't feel like we ever really found our groove. I think if we'd had maybe a couple more matches to discover our chemistry together, and I was very privileged, like to use Claudio as an example. Through the OOs, there is no one that spent more hours training with me in the ring than Claudio. Because we had so many hours together, we had a very natural chemistry. And I think that's why we were able to produce the kind of matches that we did. To this day, people still share with me that clip of the ending from the Ted Petty Invitational 2006.
Oh, yes, exactly. That was amazing. Yeah.
Right? Like, once a week, I still get tagged in something with that clip, a clip from a match which is nearly 20 years old. We had a very unique chemistry. Some of the guys I think I had my very best matches with, we had that unique chemistry because we had trained together. And Brian and I, we did not train together. So certainly one thing that I appreciated about being in the ring with Brian was it was always a great challenge. And I liked that. I liked that it challenged me. But yeah, I often think back on that and feel like I wish we'd maybe had one or two more. They were always very high profile as well, for Ring of Honor or whatever. And I feel like we needed maybe one or two, like in a barn somewhere when nobody was really paying attention. To go a little bit deeper into that, when you find that comfort zone with somebody, when you start clicking, when I'll call it speaking the same wrestling language, that's when you feel the freedom to play jazz. You feel the freedom to start to improvise, to throw in a couple notes that maybe shouldn't be there and see how the other person reacts to it. And yet there's other times where you're going to play it very close to the vest, where it's very safe and it's very guarded. And we never really got to play jazz. And I wish that we had.
This is a great kind of point by you here, and something that I wanted to bring up to you, especially you, because I feel like you would know kind of what I'm talking about for sure, or have maybe the better expertise than anyone I've heard. So when a guy is wrestling another guy, let's say they're having a feud or per se, do you want them like talking to each other, or do you almost want it to the point where there is no talk? Like Flair and Steamboat used to say they didn't talk at all, like just literally just went out there and had the match because obviously they wrestled so many times. But do you want that, or do you want talking, or do you want to talk beforehand and go over the match and rehearse spots? Like, how do you actually want to do that as a, obviously such an experienced wrestler as you? Because I feel like a lot of it seems choreographed nowadays. Do you want that, or do you not want that, or do you want no talking, or do you want, like you said, almost just see what we're going to do and have an unspoken language? How do you go about it, or is there not one set rule in stone?
Well, to be sure, I don't think there's one set rule. I do feel like it depends on what the comfort zone and the strengths and weaknesses of the individual wrestlers are. I don't doubt that because of the era that he came up in and how he was trained, Ric Flair can go to the ring and have a fantastic Ric Flair match knowing nothing. He will invent it all on the fly. And yet, having said as much, and I'm a tremendous Flair fan, there is a sameness to his matches, right? They are composed of a limited vocabulary because it has to be communicated in a shorthand on the fly in the ring, right? If we're only doing it live in the ring, I have to be able to tell you what I need from you in a matter of 2 to 3 words, and it has to be very clear and to the point. So for that reason, it is composed of a somewhat limited vocabulary. What Brett and Owen did at WrestleMania 10 could not have been composed with that limited vocabulary. That would have required some degree of masterminding beforehand. And it's down to your comfort. Ricky Steamboat is such a perfect person to call out here because Steamboat has outstanding matches with Ric Flair that hold my attention rapt. I don't want to look away from my screen when they're doing what they were doing. Yes. I just watched one of theirs. It was about 20 minutes long. Steamboat was in long green and Flair had red trunks on. It might have been in Chicago. It was definitely for the NWA title, I think. It was
Chi-Town Rumble, yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. It was fabulous. And I don't doubt that was completely done in the ring. And yet, Savage and Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 meticulously masterminded every moment of that. Yep. But because their strengths were imbuing it with a spontaneity, you can't tell the difference. You can't look at the one and be like, well, this match is good, but this match is lousy. No, these are 2 all-time classics, and yet they were made in completely opposite fashions. So I think it really speaks to the comfort of the performers and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And the fact that Steamboat could find equal success with a wrestler like Flair and a wrestler like Savage speaks to his versatility.
No doubt. That well said. No doubt about it. That's so true. An interesting note about WrestleMania 10, since I talked to the man, that match is completely different than the original match that they had worked on together. So he literally, Brett, scrapped the entire thing, scrapped it because he said, he's like, if we do it this way and the way we had planned, he goes, you're going to look like a babyface because he had all high spots and blah, blah. So Brett snuck in, and obviously they worked in it together, but he brought him back and he goes, "We're changing the whole thing." Owen's like, "Really?" He's like, "Yes." He's like, there's a week or whatever before WrestleMania. Like, we're changing the entire match. He's like, "You need to get heat. You're going to be the heel. Like, you can't be doing all this high spots." So he snuck in a bunch of stuff. And obviously he said Owen improvised some of like the heel stuff and like the facials and Owen being Owen and how good he was. But he was saying like they completely changed the match from what they wanted it to be. So I was like, wow. I was like, you never would have known because it's just
Right.
perfect match.
Right. I'll pick an argument with you there, John. I feel like there's no such thing as a perfect match, but I will say this: I think that one is a masterpiece.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. I was there for WrestleMania 10 too.
Were you
I was loving
really?
that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Wow.
About 18
Lucky
rows back.
man.
So not bad seats either. Yeah, it was awesome. I actually enjoyed that a lot more than the ladder match. I know some people go crazy when I say it, but I thought Bret Owen was a lot better, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm in that same camp. But as someone who grew up, I loved the Rocket Owen Hart. I loved him in High Energy. I loved him in
Yeah.
New Foundation. And of course, as an admirer of the Hitmans as well, it felt like that match was tailor-made for me. And I loved every second and it's a long opener for a WrestleMania, right? That one's a
20
long
something minutes.
opener,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
Usually they're short. Yep.
It's delicious. You could eat
Yes,
that meal again and again and never get tired of it.
yeah, it's awesome. And Owen, it's one of those guys, he can kind of work any style too. So if you want to do the high flying stuff that you originally planned, well, you kind of want to get him booed. So let's go. You know what I mean? He could switch and go in a different direction at any point. So
Very much so, right? The Owen Hart that wrestles Jushin Liger over in New Japan, or even him, he has that brief singles run where he's kind of wearing like a teal blue with orange as just the Rocket. He's producing matches wildly different than what you'll see later on at WrestleMania 10 or like that European title final against Davey Boy Smith.
yeah, definitely for sure. So as we start to wind it down here, we head towards the finish. We're
Oh,
talking
yeah,
about
it's
you.
about that time already, John. We've just
Oh
been
yeah.
chatting away.
So you were talking about YouTube, obviously, till we make it. But let's just say somebody goes on YouTube, they type in Mike Quackenbush. Mike Quackenbush versus who? Who should they look up? I know Claudio is one of them, right? Who should they
Definitely.
look up?
I don't like most of my own matches. There are a few with Claudio that I am proud of. The match where Eddie Kingston wins the Chikara Grand Championship from our first pay-per-view event called High Noon. It is the only singles match Eddie and I ever had. I believe it does hold up. Even now, 13 years later, I think it does hold up, and I'm proud of that one. I had a handful of matches late in my active days against Zack Sabre Jr., and wrestling him is an absolute delight. I have this much of a man crush on him, too. I don't mind telling you. I think he is an absolute delight, and I cannot mask the joy on my face when I am trading holds with him. So if for some reason you were so possessed as to need to watch a Mike Quackenbush singles match, maybe one of those. Especially if you're having a bout of insomnia, try it. It might be the cure you're looking for.
And hey, with Zack Sabre, he's about to become, I think, IWGP World Heavyweight Champion over there in Japan. I mean, he is killing it right now.
Right. He is in peak form.
I feel like he's always been great, but he's definitely, I think, hit his stride, if you will, hit his prime, I think, in the last year or so. Maybe even a little bit more than that, but I feel like right now he's in the thick of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It has just been it's been great to watch his ascension and kind of bucking all the trends about foreigners in Japan to just prove beyond a shadow of a doubt what a world-class talent that guy is.